My property has a beautiful, winding creek running through the back of it. It's been in my family for generations, a little slice of natural paradise. But when a new, upscale housing development popped up next door, my quiet life was turned upside down. The Homeowners Association, or HOA, for this new neighborhood was run by some of the most entitled people I've ever met. They saw my creek not as a natural wonder, but as an inconvenience. They complained it was attracting pests and that the sound of the flowing water was disruptive. I tried to reason with them, explaining the creek's ecological importance and its role in natural drainage for the entire area, but they wouldn't listen. One morning, I woke up to the sound of heavy machinery. I ran outside and saw a construction crew, hired by the HOA, pouring concrete directly into my creek. They were building a massive culvert, essentially a concrete pipe, to redirect the water and pave over it. I was furious. This was my private property. I showed them the property lines. I called the police. I waved my deed in their faces. The foreman, on the phone with the HOA president, just shrugged. He told me they had a permit to improve drainage and that I should take it up with the HOA. The police said it was a civil matter, a property dispute, and they couldn't intervene unless there was a direct threat. I felt completely helpless as I watched them entomb my family's creek in a gray, ugly slab of concrete. I immediately contacted a lawyer. We filed a lawsuit for trespassing, property damage, and a dozen other things. The HOA laughed it off. They had deep pockets and a team of high-priced lawyers who tied up the legal process in endless motions and delays. They argued that my creek was a public nuisance and their actions were a community improvement. It was infuriating. They had literally trespassed and destroyed part of my land, and they were trying to paint me as the bad guy. The legal battle dragged on for months, costing me a fortune and causing immense stress. All the while, the water was now being forced through their narrow, poorly designed concrete pipe. But I'm a patient person, and I know a thing or two about the land I live on. See, I'd tried to tell them that creek wasn't just for looks. It was the primary drainage for a huge watershed. For generations, during the rainy season, it would swell up, flooding its natural banks and spreading the excess water across a wide area, which my land was perfectly suited to handle. It was a natural floodplain, their concrete pipe. It was a bottleneck, a very, very small bottleneck. I had warned them. I told their engineers, I told their lawyers, I told every homeowner who would listen, but they were too arrogant. They believed their modern engineering was superior to nature. So, I waited. I watched the seasons change. The legal battle continued, its slow, grinding pace, and then the rainy season arrived. It started with a few light showers, but soon it turned into a deluge. For weeks it rained like I'd never seen before, the kind of rain that makes you feel small. And I started to watch the water. The creek, now a furious torrent, slammed into the entrance of that concrete culvert. The pipe was completely overwhelmed within hours. It was like trying to drain a swimming pool through a drinking straw. The water had nowhere to go. So, it started to back up. First, the water pooled on my property, just like I expected, but it kept rising. Soon, it crested the concrete barrier they had built and began to spill over into their pristine million-dollar neighborhood. At first it was just puddles in their manicured lawns, but the rain didn't stop. The puddles became ponds. The ponds became lakes. The entire multi-million-dollar housing development was built on a slight basin, land that had always been a natural floodplain. The water, denied its ancient path through my creek, simply reclaimed its old territory. It was a sight to behold. Their perfect green lawns disappeared under feet of murky brown water. The water crept up their driveways, swallowing expensive cars. It lapped at the foundations of their enormous houses. The entire neighborhood, their pride and joy, was transforming into a giant swamp. The very drainage improvement they had illegally installed on my land had become the instrument of their own destruction. It had created a dam, and their homes were now sitting in the middle of a newly formed lake. The panicked calls started coming in, first from the HOA president, then from other residents. Suddenly, they were desperate to talk. They were begging me to do something. It was almost comical. They wanted me to, what? Magically make the water disappear. The same people who had laughed in my face were now pleading for my help. I calmly told them that the situation was, as they so elegantly put it, a community improvement issue. I suggested they consult their expensive engineers who designed the culvert. The line went very quiet after that. The aftermath was catastrophic for them. The standing water sat there for weeks. Foundations cracked. Walls buckled. The ground became so saturated that several homes started to literally sink into the muck. The smell was unbearable. The entire development was declared a disaster zone. The damage was in the millions. Many of the homes were deemed structurally unsound and had to be condemned. Their property values plummeted to zero overnight. They hadn't just lost their lawns. They had lost everything. Suddenly their lawyers were a lot more agreeable. My lawsuit, which they had dismissed as a nuisance, was now their top priority. They offered me a settlement that was, to put it mildly, extremely generous. It more than covered my legal fees and the cost of removing every last bit of their concrete monstrosity from my land. The best part of the settlement, the HOA was forced to issue a public apology and pay for a team of environmental specialists, my specialists, to restore the creek to its natural state. It took a full year, but eventually, the creek was free again. Watching the water flow naturally along its old path, hearing that gentle burbling sound return, was more satisfying than any amount of money. The collapsed, swampy husks of their million-dollar homes next door served as a permanent monument to their arrogance. They tried to conquer nature, to bend it to their will. But nature always bats last. They thought they were burying my creek, but all they did was dig their own graves. Don't mess with Mother Nature, and definitely don't mess with a landowner who understands her power. Thanks for listening to my story, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more.